Once upon a time, a witch loved stories galore, and greedy as she was, she wanted more and more. When she saw that the librarian had stories of all kinds, she said, "I'll capture you, all your stories will be mine." There took place a curious chase through meadow, tree, and flower, till at last they ended up right at the witch's tower. Now poor Marian, the librarian, a prisoner she'll stay, until the witch is happy and lets Marian go away.
Hi, I've been waiting for you to come and help me get a story for Witch Kerfumbly about someone who is curious like she is. Do you know what curious means? Well, if you are curious, you like to learn new things, you like to try to do new things, and you like to find out about everything. Now, Kerfumbly is curious, but there is someone in books who is even more curious than she is. Do you know who I mean? Curious George, that curious little monkey. And oh, here is the hat that his friend always wears. And let's see. Here is the medal that Curious George won when he was the first little monkey in space. So, let's put these in the machine. And turn it on. And it is Curious George Gets a Medal by H.A. Ray. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey, but he was always curious. George was alone this morning, looking at a picture book, when the doorbell rang. It was the mailman. "Here's a letter for you," he said. George was curious. It was not often that somebody wrote to him. Too bad he could not read the letter. But maybe he could write one himself. In the top drawer of the desk there was paper and ink and a fountain pen. George sat down on the floor and began to write. Oh, but the pen was dry. It needed ink. George would have to fill it. He got a funnel from the kitchen and started pouring ink. But instead of going into the pen, the ink spilled all over the floor. George had to think of something to clean it up. Why, soap and water. He got a big box of soap powder and poured all the soap over the ink. Then he pulled the garden hose through the window, opened the tap, and sprayed water on the powder. Bubbles began to form, and then some lather, and more lather, and more lather, and more lather. In no time at all, the whole room was full of lather, so full indeed that George had to escape in a hurry. When he was safely out of the house, he first turned off the tap. But what next? How could he get rid of all that lather before his friend came home? He would get a big shovel and shovel the lather out of the window. But where was the lather? While George had been outside thinking, it had all turned into water. Now the room looked like a lake, and the furniture like islands in it. The shovel was no use. A pump was what George needed to get the water out, and he knew just where to find one. He had seen a portable pump at the farm down the road. But the pump was heavy. He would need help to pull it all the way back to the house. Now a big pig was standing near a gate. A big pig could easily pull a small pump. Carefully, George lifted the latch. And before he knew it, all the pigs had burst out of the pen, grunting and squealing. Oh, George was delighted. He had never seen anything like it. But now the pigs were all gone, and not a single one was left to help him with the pump. Luckily, there were some cows grazing nearby. cows were gentle and strong. The cow did not mind being tied to the pump. She even let him climb on her back, and off they went. Meanwhile, the farmer and his son had heard the squealing of the pigs. They rushed home from the fields, and what did they see? A little monkey riding on their cow, making off with their pump. Well, the chase was on. George and the cow were ahead at first, but the pump was slowing them down. The farmers were getting closer and closer. Now they had almost caught up with them. But where was George? Here he was, hiding in a shirt. The farmers had run past him. Just then, a truck came rattling down the road. George jumped aboard. The truck drove to a part of town that George had never seen before. At last, it stopped in front of the museum. Now, George did not know what a museum was. He was curious. While the guard was busy reading his paper, George slipped inside. He walked up the steps and into a room full of all sorts of animals. At first, George was scared, but then he noticed that they did not move. Well, they were not alive. They were stuffed animals put into the museum so that everybody could get a good look at them. In the next room, George saw something so enormous it took his breath away. It was a dinosaur. George was not scared this time. He knew it was not real. And then he saw the palm tree full of nuts. George liked nuts. He climbed up the dinosaur's neck and started to pull, but the nuts would not come off. George did not know they were not real either. He pulled harder and harder, and the tree began to sway. Crash! Down came the tree on the dinosaur's head. Down came the dinosaur, and down came George. Guards came rushing in from all sides, and underneath the fallen dinosaur, they found a little monkey. They pulled him out of there and brought him to Professor Wiseman, who was the director of the museum. "Lock that naughty monkey up right away," he said, "and take him back to the zoo. He must have run away from there." Suddenly, the door opened. "George!" somebody shouted. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. "It seems you got yourself into a lot of trouble today," he said, "but maybe this letter here will get you out of it. It's from Professor Wiseman. He needs your help for an experiment. George, he wants you to bail out of a spaceship in flight." "So you are George?" Professor Wiseman said. "If I had only known. Of course, everything will be forgiven if you are willing to go in our spaceship." They got the smallest size spacesuit for George and all the other things he needed for the flight. When everything was ready, a truck drove up with a special television screen mounted on it to watch the flight. The great moment had come. Professor Wiseman began to count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! He pressed the button, and the ship rose into the air, slowly first, and then faster and faster and higher, until they could no longer see it in the sky. But on the screen they saw George clearly all the time. Now the moment had come for George to bail out. Professor Wiseman flashed the signal. They watched the screen. George did not move. Why didn't he pull the lever? In a few seconds it would be too late. At last George began to move. Would he reach it in time? There, he had grabbed it. The door opened. Hurrah! George was on his way. Out of the blue, an open parachute came floating down to earth. The truck raced over to the spot where George would land. What a welcome for George. Professor Wiseman hung a big golden medal around his neck, and on the medal it said, "To George, the first space monkey." Everybody shouted and cheered. It was the happiest day in George's life. Oh, wasn't that a good story? I think Kerfumbly will like that one, don't you? Will you come and help me call her? Left and right and Zachary Zoo, here's a story just for you.
Oh, a story for me. Is it about someone just like me?
Just like you.
Oh, good. Was this a sad story or a happy story? Oh, a happy one, good. Was it about someone who is curious, just like me? Oh, it is. And is this someone smart, just like me? Good. And does this someone like to try new things, just as I do? Oh, good. What was this person's name? Curious George? Well, was he a witch just like me? No? Well, what was he? A monkey! Marion, it isn't nice to call me a monkey.
I didn't call you a monkey.
Why, you said this story was about someone just like me.
Well, that's because you are both curious.
Well, I'm not curious anymore. I'm furious. That means very angry. No more monkeys. A story about an animal is all right, but no more monkeys.
My goodness, she was furious, wasn't she? Maybe we should get her a story with lots of animals in it. Maybe a farm story. Do you think you could find a farm story? Oh, good. I'll see you right here next time.
Once upon a time, a witch loved stories galore, and greedy as she was, she wanted more and more. When she saw that the librarian had stories of all kinds, she said, "I'll capture you, all your stories will be mine." There took place a curious chase through meadow, tree, and flower, till at last they ended up right at the witch's tower. Now poor Marian, the librarian, a prisoner she'll stay, until the witch is happy and lets Marian go away.